Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to part 9 for my RPG Basics tutorial series. Today, we're going to be adding in some enemies, and it's just going to be a basic little slime enemy. You might recognize this one from my game Grain War. I'm going to let you guys use that slime sprite. It's a pretty good one. And we're going to be fixing some of the issues with depth and stuff like that as well. And you'll be learning about how the parent system, the parent-child inheritance system, works in GameMaker, which is one of the most powerful things that GameMaker can do. And is important to understand if you want to build a project that's going to scale, or a big project. So let's jump in and get started. First of all, there's going to be a link in the description with the resources, basically just the slime and the other sprites as well if you don't have those yet. The resources available for this project. And I'm also going to put a link to my website in the corner, probably right above me, right here. So first thing we're going to do is create a new sprite. We're going to call this sprite enemy slime. And we're going to load the sprite. I'm just going to load it from my desktop right there. And you should load it from the download. The link in the description. I'm going to center this sprite on the slime and press OK. Now we're going to create a new object, and we're going to call this object enemy slime. And we're going to select the slime sprite and create the slime enemy object. Now there's a few things that we need to do. We need to make this a physics object. So click on uses physics, and then we need to give it a collision shape. So click on modify collision shape. We're going to use a shape. We're not going to use a circle or a box. Modify collision shape. Now it's going to bring up our collision shape editor. You can scroll to zoom in and middle click to pan, and it blinks a lot in here, and that's just the way it works. So now, an important thing to realize with this editor that I don't know that I've mentioned before is you can't have anything that's concave, which means goes in on itself like this. If I try and press OK, it's going to say not a convex shape. Please adjust points. You can't have it be concave like that. Do you see how this comes in on itself like that? This right here is convex, where it comes out. This is concave. We can't do this, okay? So that's just an important thing to note. Let's get these basic shapes in here. Let's see, I'm going to come over here. I want the collision box to be basically symmetrical. And this is actually too high because we want the collision box to be on the little black thing in the background. The little dark shape. Because that's where the enemy is actually touching the ground. This up here, we don't need to worry about that being in collision. So I've created this nice little collision shape around the enemy, and you can see it is convex. It does not go in on itself like this. Press OK. Should let us do that. We can press OK again, and we can actually put a couple of these little guys in the room. They're not going to do anything yet, though, because we haven't programmed them to do anything. So I'm putting 3 in the room. We're going to run the game. Now, just because we're using the physics system, we'll automatically be able to do collisions with them. But the collisions aren't working right now. You can see we can't collide with them. And that is because they don't have the collision events, right? And there's a couple other things they can, let's make them so they can move and so they don't animate so fast. So add a create event to the slime. I'm just going to drag over a code action and call this initialize the slime. And we're going to do image speed equals 0.1. So we're going to have them animate really slow. And that should be good. Now we're going to make them move towards the player. So let's add an event. Let's add a step event. We want this event to happen every single step, and we want them to move towards the player. Now there's a little kind of a shortcut trick for how we can do this. Move towards the player. And I'll show you guys how it works right here. Let me just double check and make sure I'm recording. Okay, looks like I'm live. That's good. I was a little worried there. Okay. So now move towards the player. We need to adjust the physics position X and the physics position Y. Okay, and we need to have them move towards the player. Now you can use big long if statements for this, like if X is greater than object player.x, then physics position X plus equals 4, you know, move to the, if basically if or minus equals, if the player is to the left of us, then move left. If they're to the right of us, move right. You can use that, but there's a shortcut that I'm going to show you that's really, really cool. And it's physics position X plus equals object player.x minus X. Okay? Now this is going to move us exactly the distance that we need to be towards the player. So it will basically instantly appear on top of the player. So that's not really what we want either. But what we can do is there's a function called sign. Okay? Not sing. Sign. And what this does is whatever value you pass into it, it returns out either a 1 or a negative 1 based on the value's sign. So if the value is positive 10, it's going to give you a 1. If the value is negative 5, it's going to give you a negative 1. If the value is negative 10, it's going to give you a negative 1 as well. So it just returns a 1 or a negative 1 based on whether the number was positive or negative. So if we do this and we are to the right of the player, then the player's x minus our x is going to be a negative number, so we'll move 1 pixel to the left, basically a negative. This will return a negative 1, and we'll move 1 pixel to the left. But if we are to the left of the player, then we're going to move 1 pixel to the right. This will return a positive 1. So it's a nice little trick. Plus equals sign object player.y minus y. Now you have to make sure that your player object is in the room currently, because we're not checking to see if it exists. So if the player object isn't in the room, you will get an error message. Okay? We'll fix that later. So now our slime should move towards the player. Let's see what happens. I kind of want to show you guys this one step at a time so you can visualize it. Okay. First of all, they move really fast. And second of all, they don't collide with anything. And they go inside of each other. And it's just super weird looking, honestly. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make the slimes move slower. So let's give them a speed. Speed equals 0.5. Well, let's do 0.25. I'm going to make them move pretty slow. And then in their step event, we're going to, instead of moving 1 or negative 1, we're going to do 1 or negative 1 times the speed. Okay? Since this is going to be just a 1 or a negative 1, then it's going to just make our speed either positive or negative, whichever speed we set it to. Okay, that looks good, but we still need collisions. So let's add collisions. Now, this is kind of a pain because let's add a collision with the wall and just drag over code. If you remember, since we're using the physics, the collisions will automatically work as long as there's a collision event. And we just need to add a comment in here to make sure that this collision event doesn't get deleted. So we don't even have to have code in here. We just need the comment. Collide. Okay, now we're going to duplicate this object right here, collision with the view, not the view, that's ridiculous. Let's delete that. Duplicate this event right here. So right click, duplicate event, collision with the player, right click, duplicate event, collision with the enemy slimes, because they need to collide with each other too. Now you can see this is already starting to get really ugly because these have to collide with each other. Now the player also has to collide with the slime. So add event, collision with the slime. We can just do collide again. Just drag over a code action. Collide. And we have to add in a whole bunch of collision events. Every time we add in a new enemy, we have to go through with each object in the room and make sure they all collide with each other, right? And those turn. They do collide with this, but now they rotate because we haven't made it so they don't rotate like we did with the player. Let's come into the player and we're going to copy this line of code right here. Physics fixed rotation equals true. And we're going to set that on the slimes as well. But you can see this is getting ridiculous. We're copying code around all over the place, right? So we have basic moving enemies and they're moving towards the player. But like we have all this code that we've copied around and it just doesn't look good. The player shows on top of these enemies. When they come over by a wall like this, they show underneath the wall. So like there's a whole bunch of ugliness going on here. So let's look at how we can fix some of that. Now it's time to learn about GameMaker's parents. So inside of GameMaker, you can create an object that other objects inherit from. Now, what does inherit mean? Well, it means that if that object has a create event, okay, and you give the child to that object, or the child to that object doesn't have a create event, it will actually inherit the create event from the parent and run it like it was its own create event. So it inherits events from its parent. Now, that's really, really beneficial, and let me show why. Let's create an object, and we're going to call this object life form parent. Okay? This object is going to be up here. And this object is going to have a collision with itself, add an event for a collision with itself, so collision with life form parent, okay? Because all life forms need to collide with each other. So we'll just call this collide. And then it also needs to have a collision with the wall. So add event, collision with the wall. Drag over a code action, put a comment in, collide. Okay. So now it has a collision with the wall. So it's got collisions with itself and collisions with the wall. Watch how cool this is. We can delete the collision event with the slime inside of our player. We can delete the collision event with the wall inside of our player. And we can make the player inherit from the life form parent. So now the player is considered a life form and it now has collisions with itself and with the wall because it inherits those collision events from this life form object right here. These events, even though they don't show inside of the player right here, because the player's parent is the life form, it actually runs these collision events too. Okay? And it's also considered a life form. So when you see that this has a collision with itself, this also means a collision with player objects because the player is also a life form now. It inherits from it. We can do the same thing with the enemy. We can delete the collision with the player, delete the collision with the wall, delete the collision with itself, and make the enemy inherit from the life form parent. Now the enemy is also considered a life form parent. So when the enemy collides with itself, it runs this code because both enemies are considered life form objects. So now whenever we add a new enemy to the game, or even a new player, we can just make them inherit from the life form parent and all of their collisions will automatically work. So that simplifies your game quite a bit, right? Now there's some other things that we can do to this, right? Because what's something that we're doing in both of our objects here? Well, both our player and our enemy. Well, they both have physics rotation equals true, right? If we put that in the parent and then have both of them inherit from the parent, then we have the code in one spot. So if we need to change it, it's in one spot. So let's take that out of our player and add a create event. Create to the lifeform parent. And we're going to call this initialize the lifeform. Now all lifeforms, we're going to have them fixed rotation equals true. And we'll have the enemy here. We'll take out the fixed rotation equals true. And we'll run the game. And now they should inherit that from the lifeform parent. But you're going to notice that it doesn't work. So, I mean, that makes sense, right? That it should inherit now. But look, it's not working. Whoa, craziness. Right? It's not working right. So why isn't it working? Shouldn't the player inherit the create event from the lifeform parent and run this code? Well, here's what's happening. The player object and the enemy object both have their own create event. Because they have their own create event, it overrides the create event of the parent. Okay? And so if we were to delete these two create events, then they would inherit the create event from the lifeform parent. But that wouldn't work because we have code inside of here that we don't want to delete, right? We need this code. And this code won't be the same inside of both the player and the enemy, so we can't put it inside the lifeform parent. But there is a solution which doesn't involve deleting the create event for our player object. And it's a function called events. Let's see, event inherited, just like that. So what this does is it says, go, even though we have our own create event and we're overriding the parent object's create event, go to the parent and run its create event too. Okay? Events inherited, really, really awesome function. And we want this in our slime too. So now, both these objects, even though they have their own create event, they will also inherit the create event of the parent. Sometimes you don't want to inherit the create event of the parent. There are times when you don't want to, or certain events that you want to override and not inherit from the parent. But this function allows us to inherit if we want to. And look at that. Looking good. But the slimes go behind that still, and our player still goes on top of the slimes when he's behind them, right? So I'm going to teach you guys a cool little depth code that you can run that will fix that. So come into the object lifeform parent, because we want this code to run in all of the lifeforms, the player and the enemies, right? We're going to add an event. We're going to add a step event. And inside of this step event, we're going to control the depth of the object based on its Y position. Okay, this will give the illusion of kind of a 3D space. So control depth. That looks funny to me. Control. It looks weird. Anyways, depth equals negative Y. So we know that objects with lower depth are drawn in front of objects with a higher depth, okay? And in our game, we want objects that are lower on the screen, or in other words, have a higher Y value, to be drawn in front of objects that are higher on the screen with lower Y value. So if we do depth equals negative Y, if our player is at position 100 and our slime is at position 99, the player's depth is going to be negative 100, and the slime's depth is going to be negative 99, and the player will draw in front of the slime. If the player is 98, position 98 in the room, Y position 98, and the enemy is still position 99, then the player will have a depth of negative 98, and the slime will have a depth of negative 99, and it will draw in front of the player. Now, we need to check because both our player and our enemy have their own step event. So we need to make sure that even though we're overriding the lifeform step event, we need to inherit it. So event inherited. We're going to put this in both step events, the step event for the player and the step event for the slime, to make sure we inherit the event from the lifeform parent. Okay? Now when we run the game, our player draws in front of the enemy and behind the enemy. But it doesn't work with the walls yet, I don't think. Well, it'll work with those walls, and since these walls don't have a depth the other way, then it kind of works there. So we don't really have to worry about it for now. When we fix the walls up a bit, we'll probably have to change the code for the walls. But there you go. The enemies can't attack quite yet, but they do chase us. And actually, I'm going to really quickly remove, because you guys are going to have enemies without the eyes. I removed the eyes because that's kind of a grain war thing. Replace. So when you guys as sprites, the enemies won't have the eyes. I actually want to change that to like that. There we go. It helps the animation a little bit. But there you go. Congratulations. You've added in your very first enemy, and you also learned about how GameMaker's inheritance system works, and you've just grazed the surface of it. It is so powerful. I would argue that it's more powerful than scripts. Scripts are really powerful too, but this inheritance system is just awesome. So congratulations. If you have any questions, be sure and send them my way. Usually the best way to give me a question is by email, and my email is on the about page for my channel. So check that out. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If it was helpful to you, if you learned something, be sure and like it. Give it a thumbs up. Share it on Twitter. Share it on Facebook. Share it with your friends. Get them started on this. If you want to build some games with your friends, get them started in GameMaker. You can start together. So thank you guys so much for your support, and I will talk to you guys later.